Being courteous to a waiter or waitress goes without saying. They're delivering you your food, and that may just go double for nurses, the ones delivering you your potentially life-saving medication. But don't worry too much, some nurses aren't bothered by nasty patients, they'll just kill you either way. Even though Charles Cullen worked everywhere from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, he couldn't hold down a nursing job due to his disturbing behavior. But there were no investigations launched to look deeper, and he was able to continue working and killing. Charles killed 5 patients while working at St. Luke's University Hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and he was forced to resign. Then, his murder count grew by 13 over the course of a year while working at New Jersey's Somerset Medical Center. His final victim, Father Florian Gall, had been recovering from pneumonia when he suddenly died. While investigating the unexpected death, doctors found unusually high levels of digoxin, a medicine used to treat irregular heartbeat, in his blood, indicating he'd been murdered. Immediate suspicion fell upon Charles, who worked night shift each time the mysterious deaths occurred. Charles' victims ranged in age from 21-year-old Michael Strenko to the elderly, but he was adamant that he thought he was helping, though he couldn't give a reason for killing people that weren't terminally ill. Because Charles killed undetected for 16 years, it is thought he could have upwards of 300 victims. Charles was convicted on 29 of the murders and sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences with no chance for parole. If it is found he killed in higher numbers, he could become the most prolific serial killer in American history. Janine Ann Jones worked in the pediatric ICU at Bexar County Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, and whenever she was around, children seemed to die. The beautician-turned-nurse was always working when babies in the ICU suffered cardiac arrest or respiratory failure unrelated to their pre-existing conditions. The hospital was fearful of legal repercussions from the rise in infant deaths and forced Janine to resign. She found another job at a pediatric physician's clinic in Kerrville, Texas. It was here that Janine killed 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan with a dose of succinylcholine, a potent drug that paralyzes the skeletal and respiratory muscles. Investigators found that Chelsea wasn't her only victim. She had poisoned at least 6 other children with various muscle relaxants. She claimed she had made the children sick with the intent to revive them and be seen as a savior, but many of the infants succumbed to drugs before she could save them. It is believed she possibly murdered up to 46 children, though due to missing hospital records, only 1 could be proven. She was sentenced to a total of 159 years behind bars. However, due to a Texas law that prevents overcrowding in prisons, Janine is expected to be released from jail in 2018 for good behavior after only serving 33 years of her sentence. If found guilty of killing even 1 more of her 46 suspected victims, she will remain behind bars for the rest of her life. Ex-Marine turned nurse Robert Diaz liked to be called Doctor, even though he never received the proper credentials. But in 1981, while working at 3 separate hospitals in Los Angeles, the 42-year-old often predicted patients' deaths with concerning accuracy. The deaths occurred in intensive care units in the pre-dawn hours, and each victim suffered dizziness and violent seizures before their bodies turned blue and they died. When authorities received an anonymous tip from someone who claimed 19 patients under Robert Diaz's care all died of similar causes, they questioned him. At first, he denied any involvement, saying he didn't know how or why his patients suffered eerily similar fates, but eventually he confessed. Robert revealed he injected his elderly victims with lethal doses of lidocaine, a drug used to regulate the heartbeat, and destroyed medical records to hide what he'd done. Robert Diaz's playing doctor resulted in 12 confirmed deaths, though the number could be as high as 38. He was sentenced to death in 1984, however, he passed away in 2010 from natural causes, before the sentence could be carried out. At Lane's hospital in Vienna, Austria, 4 nurses became fellow friends and murderers, and it all began with 23-year-old Waltraud Wagner when she injected one of her patients with a deadly dose of morphine. Following the murder, Waltraud let 3 other nurses in on her secret, and surprisingly, they too began killing with her. From 1983 to 1989, Waltraud Wagner, Irene Leidoff, Maria Gruber, and Stefania Meyer ran a murder squad, disposing of nuisance patients with various injections of insulin and tranquilizers, but also by drowning them in their own hospital beds. The women, nicknamed the Lane's Angels of Death, would hold down patients and pour water down their throats until they died. Because many elderly people die with fluid in their lungs, the women continued killing for 6 years undetected. It wasn't until 1991 that they were caught. At first, they claimed they were mercy killings, but as many of their victims weren't terminally ill, no one bought it. They confessed to 49 murders, but authorities believe the number could be well over 200. All of the women were convicted on murder or manslaughter charges and were set to spend decades in prison. As of 2008, all 4 women have been released and given new identities to conceal their pasts, enraging much of the Austrian public, who fear having 4 serial killers walking in their midst. Texas native Efren Saldivar was 32 years old when he became a respiratory therapist at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center in California. From 1996 to 1997, he often worked the graveyard shift, where his co-workers noticed his unusual behavior. Fellow nurses saw the warning signs that Efren was killing his patients, but remained silent for over a year. One fellow employee glimpsed unauthorized prescription drugs concealed within Efren's work locker. Another nurse overheard him admit he'd given the wrong drugs to a female patient. These weren't the worst of his misdeeds, however, and Efren was careful when choosing his victims to avoid detection. He injected elderly patients near death with a muscle relaxant called Pavulon, which resulted in respiratory failure. The hospital launched an investigation against him, and he was eventually terminated. Later, he confessed to killing 6 of his patients in times of low staffing in order to lessen his workload. Efren pled guilty in 2002 to avoid the death penalty and was handed 6 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. However, he confessed he'd stopped counting his killings after his 60th in 1994, meaning the total could be much higher. Beverly Allett often found herself in the position of caregiver. Growing up, she had 3 siblings, took on babysitting jobs, and later took nursing classes at Grantham College in Lincolnshire, England. It was there where she became a harbinger of death. While Beverly was employed in the children's ward at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in 1991, an alarming number of children suffered and died from cardiac arrest, despite being admitted for unrelated ailments. 7-week-old Liam Taylor, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, and 2-month-old Becky Phillips all died while under Beverly's care, but no one suspected her. Becky Phillips' parents were even so moved by her compassion that they asked Beverly to be the godmother to Becky's twin sister, Katie Phillips. What they didn't know was that Beverly gave Katie a deadly amount of insulin, resulting in permanent brain damage, partial blindness, and paralysis. Katie survived, as did 9 of her other victims, but 15-month-old Claire Peck was the final child to die before the hospital staff alerted the police. All the unexpected deaths had occurred while Beverly was on duty, and she had the means to accomplish the killings. Though it is unclear why Beverly murdered children, she was diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy while in prison, a disorder in which she as a caretaker intentionally harmed children to gain attention. Beverly was sentenced to 13 life sentences and will likely never step out of Rampton Secure Hospital again. Richard Angelo fit right in at the Good Samaritan Hospital in New York as a former Eagle Scout and volunteer firefighter. The 25-year-old student's background made him an excellent nurse, but Richard's desire to play the hero would cost others their lives. Though he was good in crisis and was well qualified for the job, several coworkers noticed that many of his patients suffered sudden numbness all over the body, followed by the inability to speak and finally, respiratory failure. Only 12 of Richard's patients survived, leaving 25 dead while under his watch. Authorities had 10 of his former patients' bodies exhumed and tested, and they all came back positive for various paralytic drugs, such as Pavulon and Anectine, drugs that were later found in Richard's apartment. With the evidence mounting against him, Richard confessed his low self-confidence fueled a deadly desire to be praised as a hero, which led him to intentionally cause a life-threatening situation so that he could step in and save the day. Unfortunately, when playing with life and death, he wasn't able to save 25 of his patients, and in total he was sentenced to 50 years to life for his crimes. He is still serving out his sentence today at the Great Meadow Correctional Facility in New York. 26-year-old Jane Toppan found passion in nursing. Her empathetic and upbeat attitude with patients earned her the nickname Jolly Jane. But beneath her happy demeanor was a dark sexual obsession. As a nursing student, she experimented on her patients, altering dosage sizes of morphine and atropine just to observe the outcome. In order to conceal her deeds, she altered medical charts and spent a suspicious amount of time alone with her patients. Once she had privacy, she poisoned her patients to the brink of death and crawled into bed beside them to hold them as they died, a feeling she claimed gave her a sexual thrill. After being fired from Massachusetts General Hospital in 1890, Jane worked as a private nurse, where her desire to kill strengthened upon meeting the Davis family in 1901. After Mrs. Davis passed away following a visit with Jane, she was hired as a nurse for the remainder of the family, who all met unexpected deaths in the months that followed. One of the bodies was exhumed and tested positive for poison. Jane had murdered the entire family. While in police custody, she confessed to killing 33 of her former patients, though it's believed she killed upwards of 70 people total. Jane Toppan was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and due to her history of suicide attempts, she was committed to Taunton Insane Hospital for the rest of her life until her death in 1938. Victorino Chua of Stockport, England, was a nurse at Stepping Hill Hospital until January 2012, when his fellow nurses realized he may not have the temperament or proper qualifications to be practicing medicine. Victorino's bedside manner wasn't exactly comforting. He often became angry with his patients' families and was allegedly reprimanded by his bosses for his temper. However, instead of changing his ways, he took out his frustrations on the sick and helpless. Suddenly, nurses noticed a large number of their patients had dangerously low blood sugar levels, and 2 people, Tracy Arden and Derek Weaver, even died as a result. Another victim survived but was left with permanent brain damage. The connection to all the strange activity was Victorino. Police found his medical accreditations were possibly forged and that he doubled several patients' prescription dosages. But it wasn't until they found a handwritten 13-page confession from Victorino that they realized the true scope of his depravity. Victorino called himself an angel turned into an evil person and believed there was a devil residing within him. He contaminated 24 patients' saline drops with high levels of insulin and gave the poison bags to his fellow nurses. Reportedly, he enjoyed watching his coworkers unknowingly inflict pain on their patients. After wading through hours of CCTV footage and questioning hundreds of staff members, authorities were finally able to convict Victorino on 2 counts of murder. He received 25 life sentences and won't be eligible for parole until he's served for 35 years. 42-year-old Daniela Poggiali worked in the healthcare industry for 17 years and had a reputation for excelling at her job. However, some of her co-workers saw her in a different light. From 2012 to 2014, while working at the Umberto I Hospital in Lugo, Italy, fellow nurses noticed Daniela administering sedatives and laxatives to her patients to irritate the next shift. Daniela also had images on her phone showing her smiling while posing next to a deceased patient, an action she later said she regretted. Still, something was off about Daniela. Medical records show that over the course of 2 years, Daniela was present at 96 patient deaths, twice as many as her co-workers. Then her 78-year-old patient, Rosa Calderoni, went into cardiac arrest and died shortly after. The medical examiner found deadly traces of potassium chloride in her system, the same chemical used in lethal injections in the United States. Authorities estimate that Daniela killed anywhere from 38 to 96 people. Investigators believe that these were no mercy killings, but a power trip to rid herself of particularly troublesome patients. Daniela claims she is innocent and that she has never harmed her patients, but the prosecutor has labeled her a megalomaniac with a god complex. If she is found guilty of all 96 deaths, she will go down in history as one of the most prolific serial killers of all time. That's all for this episode. Now be sure to watch another video by pressing over here. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel by pressing up here now, because you won't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.